Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Sit back, stay warm, relax, and stay sinful. Story number 1. This happened to me 3 years ago. I was in college, but I took night class because I was working full-time by day. That night my class ended around 10 p.m. The school is a bit far away from my home. I could walk, but it was winter and lots of snow had fallen that week. The walkways were full of snow. It would have taken me forever to walk home. My bus app told me that I had just missed the bus, and the next one was 30 minutes away. When this happens, I would always walk to the nearest subway because there was another bus stop, and instead of waiting and freezing, I would walk to warm myself up a little. So that is exactly what I did that night. The shortest way to the subway station was through a park. I always took that path and had no reason to worry that this night was going to be any different. Before arriving to the park entrance, I noticed there was a guy with a very recognizable hockey-themed winter hat smoking near the benches. As soon as he saw me, he picked up his things, slowly walked toward the walkway. I have no idea why, but I found him suspicious, and I remembered something my mom told me when I was a child. When you feel like something is off about someone at night, find any reason you can to slow down and let him walk past you. You'd rather have someone in front of you than behind you. For some reason, I thought he was weird and did just like my mom told me. I faked receiving a text and slowed down so he could walk in front of me. He was so incredibly slow, as if he wanted me to get past him, but I would just slow down even more. He was vaping something that smelled like super fake strawberry. This will be important later. I was hoping he wouldn't go into the park, but he did. We walked like that in the park until I noticed there was a hockey game going on. I decided I would go and watch the match, just to let him take some distance before I would keep going. As I was turning right to get to the outdoor ice rink, he turned left on a path that goes by a building. I was reassured that he wasn't going in the same direction I needed to go. Still, I was a bit curious about the match, so I watched it for a minute or so, then turned back to go on the path. As I turned, my blood ran cold. The same guy that turned left was turning the other corner of the building. He just walked around the building. If I had kept going instead of watching the hockey by doing this, he would have been behind me. I was petrified, but I was still relatively safe because there were people around. The guy walked slowly as ever in the direction I needed to go, but I did not follow him right away. I waited for a bunch of students to walk by, and then I walked behind them. Safety in numbers. He was waiting by the park exit, checking his phone. When he saw the bunch of students and he walked away, normal speed this time. I saw him turn right on a street, and I thought it was the end of it. Eventually, I reached a subway station and started waiting for the bus. And then, I smelled a very familiar, potent strawberry smell. As I turned to look around, there was the guy with the hockey-themed hat and another guy, both staring at me. When the bus arrived, I was shaking. It was not because of the cold. They both got on the bus with me and other passengers. I told the bus driver about what was happening. Where I live, past 9 p.m., women can ask a bus driver to be dropped alone at a bus stop, making sure no one can follow her. That is exactly what the bus driver did. I had the bright idea to get out one stop early, and I walked in the opposite direction from my home, and waited for the bus to leave. I turned around to wave at the bus driver as a way of thanking him, and I saw the two guys banging on the middle door. The bus driver locked them in so they wouldn't open. I took that bus almost every night, and I never saw those two guys, nor have I ever seen them around my house. But here they were banging on the door, and although I could not hear them, I could clearly see them yell at the bus driver. When the lights finally turned green and the bus left, I rushed back home faster than I ever did in the snow. The next night after school, I was too nervous to use my shortcut through the park, so I took the long way around. I got to my bus safely, but what I saw on that ride scared the living hell out of me. At the bus stop that I was dropped off at the previous day were two guys. one with a hockey-themed hat. They did not get on the bus. My first thought was they were waiting for me and not the bus. Luckily for me, this was not my stop. Maybe I was just paranoid, and all of this was just a strange series of coincidences. But I was scared to get on that bus. Still am today. I moved in with my boyfriend since then, but the shortest way to our house is through the park. I still take the long way around at night. Story number 2. This occurred in 2009. I was 22 years old and was leaving my home state of California to head east for my corrections job. I was driving down the loneliest highway portion of the route, and it was around 3 a.m. on a Sunday. They don't call it the loneliest highway for nothing. I hadn't seen another soul for at least a half hour. I was starting to get sleepy, but I wasn't tired enough to pull over and take a nap when I saw a broken down car on the side of the highway. I slowed and saw a woman standing next to the car. I approached this woman with caution, rolling down my window just a sliver. Something about her wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it then, but I know now it was my subconscious screaming a red flag. I asked her if she needed me to call a tow truck or AAA for her. She immediately tried to open my door. I explained to her that I didn't feel comfortable letting her in, but that I would wait until a tow truck came. She immediately got this look of rage on her face, started to berate me. "You're a big man, what am I going to do to you?" and saying I was cruel for not letting her in. This is where I fucked up. I can see this now 10 years later. I begrudgingly unlocked my door, figuring she was right. She's at most 5'2" and I'm over 6 feet, and have 100 pounds on her. She slips in and I ask her who I can call. This was 10 years ago, so I had a little BlackBerry Slide. She starts telling me that she'd just prefer if I'd give her a ride to the next town. Now, I'm starting to realize I've fucked up because she's avoiding eye contact, and she's fumbling in her purse. When I mentioned calling for help, she gets aggressive, demanding I take her to the next town. I'm so busy trying to unfuck this situation, I miss a man who was either hiding in or near her car. It wasn't until he was almost to my driver's side door that I managed to catch him in my rearview mirror. Fight or flight kicked in. I put my car in drive and sped off right as the fucker was reaching for my car door. I sped off and heard a ping noise, and then my rearview mirror exploded. He was shooting at me. The adrenaline alone had me going near 90. By this time, homegirl realized in whatever drug-induced stupor she was in, her little plan was futile. She started hitting me, telling me to stop and let her out. When I reached enough distance, I did just that, pulled over and demanded she get out of my vehicle. She started going for the oversized purse she had, but I had enough and I was literally shaking with adrenaline. I reached over, opened the door, and pretty much shoved her out. I tried grabbing for her purse, but she managed to hold on to it, not before dumping half of what was in there on my passenger seat. I sped off, my door still open. I waited until I was a safe distance away and slammed it and locked it. I clenched the wheel and drove, feeling like I was on autopilot. It wasn't till later that morning that I pulled into a Denny's did I realize how close I was to pretty much dying. I had a good cry and then realized a bunch of her things spilled onto my passenger seat. Most of it was just nasty wadded up napkins, a few tubes of lipstick, and drug paraphernalia. I had considered calling the cops or finding a highway patrol officer. I did do something stupid. I tossed all of her things that had fallen into a trash bag and threw them away. At the time, I had the dream of becoming a cop and knew if I got caught with drug paraphernalia, that would be impossible. I didn't think that they would believe that the drug paraphernalia wasn't mine. I noticed a cop at the gas station across from the Denny's, told him what happened. He pretty much berated me for pulling over and letting her in. He did say he'd look into it, but I doubt he did. I was so shaken I pretty much picked up my pancakes and then left to continue on my way. Story number 3. I live in a fairly safe area. The distance between my school and home wasn't too far, so my mom never minded us walking home alone. I left school a little bit late one day, probably around 4 p.m. Not that much later, but it was fall, so it was starting to get dark. I noticed a strange man walking behind me and thought nothing of it, so I carried on walking until I felt uncomfortable because he had gotten closer. I decided to take a shortcut, thinking that there would be no way he would know where I was going. He followed me up the path and through the shortcut. Now freaking out, I decided to start jogging, trying not to make it obvious, but he started speeding up and almost jogging too. I was small, so my jogging was probably his speed of walking. I got close to home and ran up my path to turn into my garden. Then I turned around to see that he had followed me up the path until he saw me reach my garden. He literally just turned around and walked back the other way. I don't know what his intentions were, nor do I want to know, but I ran in the house and straight upstairs to my bedroom. Just started crying. 10 to 15 minutes later, my mom came up and asked me what was wrong. I told her and she asked why I hadn't come straight to her when I came home. That was the last time I wanted to walk home from school. Story number 4. So a little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years, retired and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers, or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or cigarettes. This all took place in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember the date well, because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit. My dad would let me drive him to and from work, just to get experience on the road. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table that was set up along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table, along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books, getting up to run the register, stock the cooler at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right next to I-75. This in itself was really strange, because where we were located, you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere, was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting just a strange and creepy vibe about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride up to the next big town, up north from us. Ocala was the town. This is very important. My dad lets her know that he was working, and there's no way that he can take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she is looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and suddenly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns back to my dad and points at me, asking if I can take her. My dad responded back that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally I would have done it, even though it was illegal, because I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad, since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason he was almost curt and dismissive of her. Turns out he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he'd seen her walking up the drive. She cusses him for a minute and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door open. I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she slammed it, and then she walks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her and continue to watch as she makes her way back up to the interstate and then starts up the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passes and I'm in my bedroom, less than a week before my 16th birthday. I hear my dad yelling from the living room, "Son, get your ass in here and look at this." I quickly run into the living room and see my dad pointing at the television, and I look at a mugshot of the lady up on the screen, and immediately remember the lady who had been in the store. Turns out I almost gave a car ride to Eileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer and then later put to death. I still have nightmares about what could have happened to me. Thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. I need more Halloween stories, guys. The time is now. We're 2 short weeks away from the big day, and I know we all want a very extra special Halloween special, whatever. So send me the stories, guys. I need them. Email them to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. I'll include my email address in the link below. I hope everyone's doing well. Have a happy, safe, and fun weekend. Be sure to stay sinful.